Planning Board. I want to see if there's any public comments on non-agenda items. We don't appear to have any members of the public here right now, so therefore we have no public comments. So the next thing is Jeremy Martin's going to talk about some of the proposed zoning ordinance amendments.
Sure. And then we'll, after that, after I do a brief summary of them, we'll go into a public hearing for each one individually, and we'll go from there. Okay?
Should take all night.
It should not take all night. All right. The first one, why don't we start with accessory apartments? We beat this one around quite a bit over the last many months. Good evening. Over the last many months, looking at accessory apartments, I think we took comment from one individual at a couple of meetings. And what you have in front of you is what we reviewed most recently and everyone was okay with. And what this would do, currently accessory apartments are allowed in a limited number of zones. They have to be less than 600 square feet, but the owner needs to reside in the primary use building, and then the accessory apartment must be rented out as someone's primary residence. We did not define primary residence prior. This new ordinance draft amendment would expand the accessory apartments to the RU1, RU2, and the CR zones, and would also not require the owner of the property to live on the property at all. And both units would need to be primary residences of the tenants there. And we defined that primary residence as six months plus 1 day. And that's where we are with that. I think the board at the last meeting was unanimously in support of that. I don't see any issues moving forward. That's all. So that's what that ordinance amendment would do. It would hopefully allow people to establish some new apartments in town to be rented on a long-term basis. We have an issue with affordable housing. We have an issue with housing options in town, and hopefully this is a step in a direction that will facilitate more units being rented as someone's primary residence. That's it.
Okay. So do we want to open this to a public hearing?
Open up to public hearing and then go from there?
Go, next one.
Do we want, would you want
Open
to?
it.
Okay, so,
Someone should make a motion and
I
then,
move we open for public hearing on
okay.
accessory apartment.
Second.
All those in favour? Aye. Okay,
Okay.
public hearing open. So, go on. So,
I don't know if is anyone here to speak about the accessory apartments piece? I don't think so. Hey, David.
Hey.
How are you? I'm good.
okay.
I think there's no public comment, and you know what the ordinance is doing, so I think we could probably close the public hearing now, and then take a vote to move this on to the select board to voters in June.
Yeah.
Second for closing.
Okay, all those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept the accessory apartment definitions and the amendments to Article 8 for the specific zoning districts and send it on to the select board with our recommendation.
Okay.
Second.
Perfect.
All those in favour? Aye. 3-0, unanimous.
Great.
Okay.
Thank
The
you.
Article 8 out of this. Okay,
Roman numerals, old-fashioned writing.
right.
You did that in school, right?
That's all we had back in the
All right,
day.
I'll be good. Okay.
Mentioned definitions there. That was Article 3.
Yeah, I said definitions, but I didn't say Article 2.
Correct. That was just
But now I did.
Perfect. All right. Thank you for passing that one. The next one is would be an amendment to the zoning map and the zoning ordinance to move lots from the BTR, the Transitional River Business District, to the abutting Downtown Business District 1, which is called B1. This would require several amendments in the zoning ordinance to delete references to the BTR. It would also require, obviously, a map amendment. We have discussed this at multiple meetings. I sent letters out to all of the property owners I have heard from just one property owner, and I was going to read his information or what he sent to me in support of this, but that's David Dickey. He's here. I don't know if David would want to speak at the public hearing when we open it up or not. Outside of that, this would, just for people's benefit that may be listening, the B1 and the BTR are adjacent zoning districts. They're generally what we consider the downtown. They allow, for the most part, the exact same uses. The development standards, such as setbacks and lot coverages, are all the same, except for the minimum lot size per dwelling unit. There's 1,500 square foot required in the BTR. The B1 has no minimum lot size requirement for apartments or for a dwelling unit. That's what this amendment does. It would also facilitate the town's purchase of parking lots at Knox Mill and at the skate park on the other side of Knowlton Street. That's all I have. If you want to
Thank you.
vote to go into a public hearing.
Okay.
I move that we proceed this, or to push this into public hearing.
Second?
All right, all those in favour? So aye, 3-0. Okay, so public hearing is open.
Yep.
If there's any member of the public who'd like to speak, we ask that they come up to the front and turn the microphone on and state who they are before they start speaking. Thank you.
Do you want a quick history of how this all happened?
But yeah, but you got to come and sit.
David, we
there.
got to get you on
Well, I know, but I
record.
don't know if you wanted to hear the history before.
Sure, if you want to give a little history.
We love a story.
I mean, it looks like a pretty slow meeting, so
Barbara died when she's gone, I'm making everything up, and that was the history.
just press the button on that mic so it goes green.
It might go viral on YouTube, you never know.
Please don't. You with the CIA, Secret Service?
State your name, David.
David Dickey, Cameron, Maine. When I bought that property a long, long time ago now on Tannery Lane, it was a B1, and it was a B1 manufacturing. So simultaneously, there was a lot of stuff going on in this part of town, and the Casada brothers came up, and they were fun to watch. And just trying to fill uses and get things in there, they wanted manufacturing. And it might be Ronnie Hawkins was the character, but it had passed its grandfather to be manufacturing. And the 2 years had passed, and the same thing with my property, which used to be Schoolhouse Togs, which was the children's manufacturing company, of its many lives and uses. And so someone came up with the BTR so that the Knox Mill, pre-MBNA, of its little parts and pieces could be, still had manufacturing no matter what you were doing. And so they came up with this BTR zone. I figured, I didn't know what I was doing with my property, so I said, I want to be part of this whole thing, because I don't want someone to say, no, you can't make T-shirts there. And at the time, we were in the ski business. If you put boots, bindings, and skis together, you manufactured a product. So you came under different categories, so it was just, so I just got on board and just watched the whole thing over the years and hoped the day would come. It's come, so I want to get back into B1 again, which is a whole different creature in some ways, but, and I may get into out of the hotel business and build apartments someday, so 500 feet's a good size.
So you're in favour of this change?
Yes, very much so.
Yes.
What do you recognize as your disadvantages of being in the BTR now?
More changes to the BTR. It's easier to pick at, to make more changes and setbacks and everything else. I just, you know, if it's
I think it's really, I
if the
think it
creature
really comes down to the minimum lot size per
Right, it's just the
dwelling
lot
unit.
size, right?
Because for the most part,
Yeah.
all the other standards are exactly the same. It's just that minimum lot size per dwelling unit.
Okay.
That's really the issue.
Yeah, 500 feet is a good size for elderly, retired, single person as a dwelling unit, so, and 1,500 square feet is very expensive.
Well, just to clarify, what the ordinance doesn't do is regulate the size of apartment. What it did before, the BTR did before, that says if you want to add an apartment or say 30 apartments to your building, you would have to 30 times 1,500 would need to be your lot size,
Not the size.
not the size of the unit.
The lot size.
Okay.
And a lot of these,
Either way, it's giving you more flexibility.
it's giving you much more flexibility.
Perfect, that's even better, so.
It is even better, honestly.
Okay. Can I go now?
Thank you.
We like it when people come and say positive things.
When you,
Yeah, I'm not making it up yet because Barbara's still alive.
when you introduced it, you said your lot. Is that where the,
It's two lots. The parking lot is a lot, and the building, the
so it's the
hotel
one
is a
over
lot,
there.
and then I've bought other little
okay.
things in their sense, which were, the building right next to me, the newer three-story, is a B1.
Oh.
That's
Okay,
where,
okay.
that's where it stops. So I own a B1 and a BTR right there in the same spot.
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I haven't been for you guys in a long time.
Anytime,
We
you're
can't
always
wait.
welcome.
I'll be back in the historical people.
Anyone else on this one? Do you? Nothing? I mean, you don't have to. I'm not pressuring you.
No,
Everybody's talking tonight. That's good.
since there's so many here. So, I'm Kathy Jex, and I'm the treasurer of the Knox Mill on Washington Street. So we're very interested in hearing where this rezoning issue goes, because we have spaces, commercial spaces, on our first floor that we need to fill, and they have been vacant for 5 years. This is with the exception of 40 paper.
Okay.
So we're hoping that this might be just the opening that would be fitting what the town is trying to do and also fitting what we're trying to do. The rest of the building is completely filled. So it isn't a problem for residential, but it is a problem for us, the commercial side. So we'll see.
I get that. And maybe I'll just comment on that. I've met with, and it was Kathy, right?
I'm Kathy Jex,
Kathy
yes.
and Deb Chapman before, and talked about this very issue. This ordinance amendment wouldn't help them. Right now, we limit the ground floor or street level to certain uses. You can't have residential and certain uses on that first floor. So I'll be thinking about and trying to formulate a possible solution to their issue down the road. We can't do it right now. We just don't have time for it to get that to June. I think it's a huge building, and we may be able to look at kind of reducing, just look at the size of areas, certain percentage, you know what I mean, that can be used as commercial or can be used as residential as opposed to commercial. Right now, they're limited. They can't rent any of that space as residential, and that's a problem
Right.
for them.
On the ground floor.
On the ground
Ground
floor, street level.
Well, like I
Would
said,
you
we're
have to
looking
be
for that
looking at it
opening.
And not what's passed in the ordinance? Does it still
Well,
go
we
through
are
it?
bound by the ordinance. You're absolutely
Yeah.
right. But if someone property owners come to our office all the time and say, hey, I'd like to do X, Y, and
Do you
Z
mean
with
this
my
prior
property.
to the intended passage of this?
It would come after,
This is
Richard.
the future looking.
It would be in the future.
This is one thing, this is another.
Okay, all right.
I mean, people come to our office and say, I'd like to do this, can I do it? And oftentimes we can say, most times we can say, yeah, you can do that. Other times we say, unfortunately, it doesn't work. And then we look deeper into the ordinance and say, does this make sense? Can we change it? Should we change it? Can we tweak it a little bit to facilitate what they're wanting to do while also protecting what the town has historically wanted to have happen? So, I mean, it's a balancing
Trying
act.
to have a
and-
balance between both.
Exactly.
I mean, it sounds like you've got commercial spaces that just aren't being rented, like there isn't the need for them.
Well, they've been trying for 5 years,
That's
so.
a significant.
We have done
Yeah,
our utmost, believe me.
yeah. And at the same time, we've got a chronic shortage of housing
Correct.
in town, right? I mean, so
Right,
I
absolutely.
understand, like, if we've got empty spaces and there's
And
a
right
need,
above
why
this
not?
commercial space, we have 2 full floors. We have a 65,000 square foot building. The second and third floor are completely filled.
The second and third are all occupied?
Absolutely.
How are you?
Well, that's interesting. We'll look into
Anyhow,
that.
so thank you. Whatever you can do, we are open to listening to what that might
We'll look
be.
forward to any recommendations Jeremy has. Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You want this turned off?
Nope.
Please, that doesn't matter, and this is demo.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
I just live down the street.
Yeah. So I'll be looking at that as we go. And if there's no more comment from the public, we could close the hearing, and then you guys can discuss if you want to more, and then someone could do a motion to send this on to the select board to ask them to send it to voters in June.
I move we close the hearing.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have anything to discuss on this one.
We got a second to close the hearing?
Seconded, yep,
Now
okay,
we
all those in
discuss.
favour? Aye.
For
There
closing,
we go, for
yeah.
closing, okay. So hearing closed. Do we have anything to discuss?
I remember when this first came up, I think I'm the one who mentioned like there was going to be a change to be, I said, why don't you just carry it over there? It seemed like it,
Thank you, Richard.
pardon?
Thank you. I mean, I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Is there, you think there's going to be the demand for, business or retail space in that area? Or is that, it has nothing to do with this?
It has nothing to do with what we're talking about. I mean, they have commercial space already.
Yeah.
That they can't get filled.
Okay.
That said, I did send someone to Deb recently, and I think he's coming down from the Bangor area in the next couple of days to look at that space. So we're trying in our office to try to fill spaces if we can. So
I'm ready to make a motion.
Go for it.
I move that we accept the amendments to the zoning ordinance for the elimination of BTR as a separate district, transitioning it to B1. The changes reflected in Article 3, definitions, Article 4, establishment of districts, Article 6, nonconformance, Article 8, districts, Article 10, performance standards,
Article 11 signs.
Article 11, signs, and Article 12, site plan review,
Correct. Thank you.
and send it on to the select board with our recommendation.
Seconded.
Second.
All those in favour? Can you third something? Okay.
Thank you.
3-0 unanimous, thank you. Okay. So at this point, we have time for, it looks like we have time for a discussion about the proposed demolition review.
Correct.
Sunset, did you want to introduce that, Jeremy?
Sure. And this has been talked about quite a bit. As you know, you've all been involved, and the Historic Resources Committee has been working hard, trying to support this as well. And again, what this ordinance would do, would be an amendment to, and this is not the public hearing, this is still a work session, just so everyone knows that. This would amend Article 5, which is the permit required section of our zoning ordinance, and it would require, if someone was going to demolish a building, the way I have it currently written, and I'm going to share this really quick with a couple of folks here before I speak to it so they can follow along. That's all right. Dennis, sorry to get this to you earlier today, but for the most part, they're similar to what we can give you that one paper, and those are the changes. And it's on the back side of that one. So I listened to, obviously, what you guys chatted about the last time we met on this. There was some concern about whether or not the Historic Resources Committee had the ability, the legal ability, as a committee to do what the ordinance was providing for them to do, and that's to, I'm going to circle back. I got a little off track there. The ordinance, just detailing what it would do, is if you're going to demolish a building or propose to demolish an addition or a wing or a whole building in what we call the historic area overlay map. Those are national historic districts. And then we also included, for those districts that are currently under review by the Park Service and anything that lies outside of those districts but is a national landmark, there would be a delay period of 100 up to 120 days where the applicant would work with the Historic Resources Committee and other neighbors or interested parties to see if there's an opportunity to save the building, repurpose it, renovate it rather than demolish it, and then would ask that person to also, if they did move forward with demolition, to actually hire a consultant to prepare a historic recordation of that property. So we talked about this at great length. There was concern from one planning board member about the ability of the Historic Resources Committee to weigh in on these kinds of things because they're not a board, they're just a committee. I ran this by Bill Kelly, the town attorney. He had no issues with the language that I had tweaked it a little bit. He had no issues with it. The Historic Resources Committee, as this currently is an advisory, they're an advisory role. The code officer is the one that issues a permit. The code officer is the one that would technically give them, would waive the 120 days or make it down to 30 days or whatever based on comments from the committee. So Bill Kelly, the town attorney, was okay with that ordinance. I did also tweak this, and this is, if you're following along on the first page in A, I did tweak this to say there was some concern about districts that were currently under review or potentially under review for inclusion as a national historic district. What I tweaked this to say.
Where are you?
How many far down in A?
Let me find it here. I'm on the third sentence, third line under A, where I changed to say, or located in a proposed historic district that is pending final approval by the National Park Service. So there's a process that has gone through to list a district as a National Register district. Surveys need to be done. The State Historic Preservation Commission gets involved. There's notification to property owners and all this, and it goes through this whole process, and then it finally gets to the National Park Service. They're the ones who make the determination and make the call that it becomes a National Historic District. So what I have changed this to recommend to state is that if it's pending final approval by the Park Service is when this would kick in.
Right, so you can't just say, I'm considering putting it into the.
Correct.
Right, it's
got to be through the process.
There's gotta be an application in process.
And all the property owners are notified, and it's like I think it's a better way to do it.
Yep.
And then let me just go back down to, I did also include on this section, in this section down below, I think starts in the fourth line from the bottom, because we're talking about a 120-day period here. I did go down there, and there was concern about just mandating the 120-day, a wing that was added to a building or a portion that was just not really contributing to the architectural or historic significance. Then the committee can recommend to the code officer, say, you know what, it's not a big deal. They can move forward on demolishing that without having to wait 120 days. I think that was a concern that some members on the planning board had last time. I also included that in on the second page in 4, actually, yeah. 120-day delay, wait, 120, and again, I left that day off of there. I gotta.
Do you need to have it in both places?
I did. What's that?
Do you need it in both places?
I probably don't, but I can work on it once we start discussing this. I get it. Okay, so then there was this other thing about the historic recordation, right? And I think that might have caught people off guard, and it's kind of burdensome, potentially, costly, potentially. So what I did was I didn't say you had to, and this is in V below, this is the last paragraph on the second page. I said that the owner or applicant shall prepare, and this is if demolition is the final result, right? What I said, that the applicant or owner shall prepare and submit a historical building recordation of the property consistent with the intent of the Secretary of the Interior Standards and Guidelines for Architectural and Engineering Documentation. So what I was trying to do was trying to get to a place where it's got to be consistent with the intent of that process, and so someone wouldn't technically have to go down that full road of doing a historic architectural and engineering recordation. It can be very costly, but if someone can document it in a way that meets that intent, so that we know what was there, we preserve it forever, that was my idea. I was trying to lessen the burden on this a little bit. That was my hope. That's really all I have tweaked since then. Again, Bill Kelly was okay with it.
How does it lessen the burden?
What's that?
How does it lessen the burden?
Well, we talked about the cost to do a historic recordation.
Yeah.
It can be pretty significant. And I'm just trying to, Rosie,
So this is saying it's only if it's deemed significant that
No, I think he's
recommendation
changing it
has-
more to just along sort of like the intent of it without
Correct.
like actually following the letter of the
Correct.
requirements.
exactly right.
So like if the requirements are you have to take 17 8x10 glossy photos,
Black and white.
black and white,
Archival print.
and frame it in something that, and then it said that you can take 10 pictures.
Right.
And
Exactly
still
right.
Recording the building without.
That was my intent in doing that.
Okay, and who's determining that?
That would be up to probably myself and the code officer to work on that with the applicant.
Okay, so rather than it being a mandated
Correct.
thing, it's something.
A little more flexibility.
A little more flexibility. That was my hope.
But, if Jeremy
You'll make it worse. What are you talking
being the arbiter of that.
Flexibility, a word that even enters the equation.
Right.
Yeah.
We want to kind of just keep him in a narrow lane.
Right.
You guys are something. Thank you. So that's what that does. And I also had to tweak there's the other one pager. I don't know where mine went to now. Oh, the Article 13 Historic Resources Committee, their duties, Section 3, I added an 11. And I tweaked it from what you saw the last time, and I just said act in an advisory role in reviewing demolition permit applications per Article 5, Section 2(1)(a). That's what that does. It just more clearly says that it's an advisory role, and that was from Bill Kelly's comments that he gave me. That's all that is. So I don't know if you want to, I know Judy and Dennis are here. And we may want to obviously probably get their thoughts, insight in it, if they would like, and we can have a conversation. I will say, I don't know where this is going to go, honestly. It sounded at the last meeting, the majority of the planning board were in favor. I know it sounded like one was against it because there was no teeth in it. I think that was Mark's. I think that's where he was really coming from when he was talking about his comments on this last time, that someone could just wait, then the building goes away anyway, and we don't preserve anything. So there is concern coming from that perspective that it is just a delay ordinance. Someone can, again, any of those significant properties in the historic district they could go through that process, wait 120 days, and then we still lose the building. And what did this ordinance really provide us, other than sitting down with that applicant, sitting down with the Historic Resources Committee and the code officer? And
Which they could refuse to do.
well, no, I don't think.
Does it mandate that they
It
must?
does. Yeah, I would say it says no permit shall be issued.
But they can refuse to do anything. I mean, as long as they sat down and gone through all the motions, they can then just sit out the waiting
Well,
period.
right.
Not-
They could
and
sit out the
still
120
demolish it,
days,
yes.
meet with the committee,
Yes.
and just say, yeah, I get your concern, okay.
Yeah.
And then leave, and then just wait it out. And then they could come in, then Steve would have to issue the permit.
Yeah.
I mean, this is using
I know
everything.
But then you do have at least the recordation that you talked about. I mean, there is something.
You do. It is something, but we don't get the, the building's gone.
Right. I mean, we realize that from the get-go, so
Yeah.
that's a pretty,
Yeah.
that debate is, we're
Yeah.
not going that route right now. I think
Right.
we all decided that's a tougher sell. To put it,
Maybe,
anything with teeth is going to be a
Yeah.
tough sell.
yeah,
And I think also the idea behind having this delay was that it does leave time to look at somebody maybe coming and salvaging it, or to have a conversation about options and things like that. So it's providing a forum for,
It's true.
it's doing everything within our soft power.
That was
to
the major
encourage.
intent of this, is to provide a forum, wasn't it?
That's one of, yes, and some time in order
Yeah.
to locate someone who might be able to salvage parts of it. I believe that was the thinking. So while it doesn't have teeth in that sense,
It does have something.
but there's an
Does have something.
encouragement and an educational piece
Yeah.
to it, and
and we've talked about, about you taking a bite of this apple on historic, when I got here, people told me, the Historic Resource Committee, very passionate, committed to protecting the town's character and town's buildings, and want to do something to move that forward. Then other people tell me, well, the town's looked at this in the past, and nothing's ever moved forward, and there's no way it's going to get passed in town. I don't know if that's true, that.
Know till you try.
You don't know until you try. So this is a bite at.
Depend on the write-up that Susan does. I mean,
Yes.
if she explains it well, I think people would think it's pretty reasonable.
That's fair. Fair.
People are watching this
a lot of
hearing.
pressure on that.
I know. There's a lot of pressure right there, Ethan. Could this be a first step to a design review ordinance? It could be. Does a design review ordinance of some sort protect the character of the town? It does. We haven't gone down that road yet. It's probably something I'd move forward on in the future, probably relatively soon, looking at that. And I think if we're talking design review, because I know the committee had concerns, and I think you guys did too, about, so if someone demolishes a building and then they can put up whatever building in its place without a review. It could be in the historic district and you can have a very modern house that doesn't fit. That's true. So, a design review ordinance or an architectural review board of some sort doesn't have to be a full-blown historic preservation ordinance. That is true. You could do something that ensures compatibility and character, matches the character of the district rather than going the full historic preservation ordinance, which I think some people may find a
So
tough
we'll
sell.
take the temperature of the town with this one and see what happens.
That's
what I
I
meant.
think that's an option.
Any other towns where such a review board is working? Because my concept is that until you get to something significantly larger, like I keep coming back to like Beacon Hill in Boston, then you have something that has teeth. But anything in between, I think it doesn't,
Yeah, so, there's a lot of towns in Maine that do design review. There's a lot of towns in Maine that do historic preservation ordinances, and they're working. When I was in Bangor, we had a historic preservation ordinance and we had a design review ordinance. Those areas were separate, but in some areas, you had both reviews done, because you were in the downtown, and it worked. The design review ordinance, didn't look at, say, and I'm just coming from experience and my understanding of historic preservation, and people have talked about becoming a CLG at some point, that's certified local government, that's certified by the state and the Park Service. You generally have to do an ordinance that meets their standards, and those standards are the Secretary of the Interior standards for treatment of historic properties, rehabilitation of properties. You get into there and you start looking at, windows, you start looking at all this stuff. They need to be, vinyl, again, we had this kind of conversation, vinyl windows wouldn't be allowed if you had wood windows in an old house under those standards. Would those be allowed under design review ordinance? Probably they would, because it's really about the character and whether it's visually compatible and those kinds of things as opposed to full-on historic preservation. I think it's doable to do design review. So, I don't know, maybe we want to open this up to discussion with some of the folks from Historic Resources Committee or anyone else here today.
I'd love to.
Get their
Love
thoughts.
to hear your thoughts if you wanted to share them with us.
And Pat would be here. She had family matter today, so.
Introducing yourselves before we start.
Okay,
Thank you.
Judy McGurk,
And I'm Dennis McGurk.
and I'm a member of the Historic Resources Committee. I don't know if any of you remember 2011 when we tried to do a full-blown preservation ordinance, and it was extremely difficult process. I mean, we had a very well-written ordinance. Members of the community who are really well qualified to do that kind of thing worked on it, and it just didn't get past the building owners. And so this is sort of like the canary in the coal mine. We're going to try this demolition review, and if it works, if it passes, can we go the next step? And, let's just see how it works with people. Because we've even tried a small group of buildings in downtown Camden that are not included in the Great Fire District to have just a historic district, a small historic district of about 5 buildings. And the building owners wouldn't go for it. And the thing is, being in a historic district is like putting a blue ribbon on your building. That's all it is. If you never take state or federal money, if you are on the National Register as a historic district, and you never take any money, any grants, any federal money or state money, there's nothing they do. They have no restrictions on you whatsoever. You can paint the building whatever color you want. You can change it. You can tear it down. You can do anything you want. There's no restrictions. If you take money to maintain your building, then that's a different story. But that's your decision. So if you're in a historic district, you get to buy a plaque to put on your building. I mean, there's, and people, tourists will come because they want to see buildings in historic districts. They want to stay in B&Bs that are historic. And we're told by the local real estate brokers that you can get a higher price when you sell your building if it's in a historic district. But there are really no restrictions on you, and we couldn't even get that by the owner. So, we thought we'll start small.
So what was the advantage of having the historic district if it didn't have any teeth?
Because it draws tourists. There's a sense of pride in the community that we have these districts, and I mean, people think that protects them. It doesn't protect them. Like I said, it's like putting a blue ribbon on your building. You're in a historic district, and tomorrow you do something that disqualifies you, and you have to take the blue ribbon off. I mean, that's about what it boils down to. But I mean, even some of those have been hard to get past the owners, and we've tried. So we thought, let's start small. Let's see if people will go along with the demolition ordinance and find out that it's not the end of the world. Can we go the next step? I mean, if there are people in town who really, really want to do the work to give it one more big push for a preservation ordinance, I'd say go for it. We would support it.
Can I ask a question about that? Back in 2011, you said you didn't get it past the building owners, and that was a historic preservation ordinance, right? That would have regulated what people did to their properties.
To a degree.
To a degree. Did that get to the select board level, and
Yes.
is that where it got shot down? Was that the select board?
I thought I already sent this to you a while back, but
I'm just trying to, for the record, I'm trying to just
I
keep it
have
out
pulled
there.
together the actual final ordinance, the minutes from the select board meetings, from the public hearings. I have all of that. I have the newspaper articles that were printed reporting these meetings. And so it gives you a flavor of what happened and what people were afraid of. And they were afraid of things that weren't even included.
Right.
But it was hard to convince people, but people don't want to be told what they're to do with their buildings.
Why would these building owners have had so much of a say? Why didn't it go to a town vote, or at least a
We didn't
select
get
vote?
past the public hearing.
The select board?
The select board canceled it because there was so much opposition.
Okay.
And you know, from your own experience, that oftentimes when people vote on something, they vote based on misinformation as opposed to accurate information. And people come with experiences from other areas where they were bad experiences and they don't want to have a repetition of that. And so they see something here that seems like it, smells like it, kind of looks like it, and they're against it. And so when you try to talk to them about, well, it doesn't really restrict you from fixing your roof the way you want to do it or delaying your repairs that are urgent, it goes in one ear and out the other and never resonates. So it is a uphill battle. It takes a fair amount of lobbying and conversation just to get them to sit down and talk with you about it, to see, you know, what are your concerns. And it never made it past the strong objections, very adamant objections the last time. So I agree with all of the criticisms that you guys have brought up. This is not a historic preservation ordinance. It's not an architectural review board. It's not a design review board. It's none of those things. It's a step towards that. And I think the fact that it doesn't have teeth is actually a good thing at this point, because it gives us the opportunity to get something passed that is not too terrible for people, not too likely to generate strong objections. And once we have it in place, if we find out that it does need teeth, then we have now a basis for saying, this is why we need to put some teeth in it. And so I think it's a step in the right direction that makes some sense, in spite of the fact that I agree that what we would be better served by is something that was stronger and more comprehensive. But I don't think we're going to get there at this point in time. Perhaps this demolition review process will give us some step in the right direction and some ammunition to convince those people who were overreacting to the possibility that their hands were going to be tied. It might give us some ammunition to help dissuade that. And so I think this is as far as we can probably go at this point in time. I think it would be great to go further and maybe even have a formal committee with authority, but this is not the time for that, in my opinion.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate your comments.
I greatly appreciate that. Good comments and thoughts.
We got another comment.
Mark Ratner, Camden Select Board. There's two parts of the verbiage that I thought might make it easier to get past the people that gave you the problem last time. That stood out to me in the section A, it says the committee may recommend a delay period of less than the prescribed 120 delay period to the code enforcement officer if it is determined, so on and so forth. That reads to me as if you're giving the committee the power to change that 120-day thing. And I think that's giving a committee more power than, because they recommend. And I said if it said the code officer could change if it's determined that it's not, that makes it a little bit more official than.
Well, I mean, it is the code officer who's making the change.
I know,
it's
but
a recommendation by the committee.
Right, but I can see people saying, yeah, but if the committee, if they're a hard case about this stuff, they may not give the recommendation. My suggestion, and the one other question I have is about once the on item 6, V1, once the 120-day waiting period has been met and the historical building recordation submitted, the code enforcement officer may issue the demolition permit. I was curious about the word may instead of shall, simply because, at that point, is there any reason that he should not do it?
Yes. I think you made my point, and thank you for that earlier. The reason it is may and not shall is that if in the code enforcement officer's judgment
Right.
that the person did not in good faith enter into the process to consider alternatives, but just sat there and waited it out, he is not forced to give a permit. That was the reason for it.
Okay. Yeah, and the one reason I said that, because that may make a difference for some people voting for it instead of against it. Just to, because at some point, if they've waited the 120 days, and I'm for it, but I'm just saying, if they've waited the 120 days, the person decides that they can't wait it out, it's really not fair based on what we're doing here, it's really not based for him to go, well, I still don't like it, I'm still not going to give you the permit. And that may make it difficult for people.
I
Just
hear what both of you are saying. I think may can be just an affirmative word, right, too?
Anyway, just suggestions. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Comments from you guys? I mean,
have a
so
couple.
here's just for purposes of process. I mean, we beat this around a lot. And I would like to frankly hold a public hearing on this at our next planning board meeting. If you keep discussing, but I'm just wanted you to
Okay.
know where that is in my worldview of getting things to voters in June, if it does get there.
Okay.
Go ahead, sorry.
That's okay. You've already caught your 120-day delay period
Yep.
thing. There's one more in 6. There's just a missing "the" before the 120-day.
Yep.
But I want to go back to my original point, which is the redundancy, I think, of the language highlighted earlier. The committee may recommend a delay period.
Just put that into.
Well, you got it twice, so one or the other.
Okay.
Since it's not like that's an introduction or something, that's just the same part of the ordinance, so you
Sure.
might as well just chop one of them. I would probably take it out of that first one
I agree.
and leave it in the.
Yep.
Leave it in at number 4.
Yep. Or is it number 4 or?
Yeah.
Yep. No, number 4.
I think I do.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it for me. Otherwise, I think I agree with the folks from the committee, and I think it's a reasonable first step.
Yeah, I saw it had a little bit of the aroma of just being a Band-Aid, but I don't think anything more serious is going to take place without a lot of work, Is there any projects in town that you could cite that would have been affected by this 120-day, that maybe they turned out negatively or positively? I'm wondering if.
I can't think off the top of my head, and I may ask Judy if you know of any. I mean, and that's what I wanted to say too, when Dennis was going through his little list of, how it would impact people. We don't issue that many demolition permits every year. So how many people this is going to impact right now is maybe once a year, maybe.
I mean, it would have affected that Jacob's Ave property.
It wouldn't have.
No?
Because that's not currently under final review by the
Oh,
Park
it's not
Service.
that far along?
Correct.
It is, the application's not in, or?
I think it's being, I don't know where it is in the process. Do you know? It's not even there yet.
Close, yeah.
So that wouldn't have been impacted.
So that is interesting, because I had misunderstood what the language meant then. I know you were loosening, or sort of shrinking the time period, but can you explain the Jacobs area, is the application in?
Oh, no.
No, so
we're
the
not even-
application isn't even in?
We're not even, we're still doing research on that.
Got it, okay.
Because originally we thought they were kit houses, like the Sears kit
Yeah,
house,
yeah.
and they're not at all.
Right.
So we're still looking into who designed them, who built them, et cetera. We think we know, but we're getting documentation.
And then as far as the actual application, submitting that, is that another lengthy process other than the research, the actual just the application
Yeah,
itself?
yes. it goes to the state first, and they take a
Right,
minimum.
but again, I'm going to like we have to find I'm trying to understand the point at which this ordinance would kick in.
Well, the thing that,
Is it when you file it with the state?
No.
with the federal government.
It's once it's gone through the state process and it's already been, like, the property owners are involved in that. They know where it is in that process.
Right.
And then at some point, the state says, yep, we're sending this to the Park Service for their final review.
And once it
And
gets,
they come out and they look at the buildings and
Yeah.
they check our research and then if they think it's okay, it's pretty much it's a done deal. But there's been instances where the
right,
federal
but
government
so
has said, well,
again, I just wanted, for my own information, I wanted to get to the point where you have to apply, goes to the state, then the state has to forward it on. That's when the ordinance kicks in. Once it goes to.
Generally, it's
once
under
it
the
goes-
final review of the Park
So am I
Service.
correct in believing that it's very unlikely that this will ever have to be used?
I wouldn't say that. I mean, people demolish houses occasionally, so you may find that next year someone comes in Chestnut Street.
Past have been affected by this?
Well, I can think of two, which I would rather not say which ones, but two houses that were demolished, and people were very upset. They were historic. They had not just the look of the building, but who owned it and things like that. But very nice houses were built in their place without anybody telling them what to do, so we got lucky. And I'll tell you, the research that I've done on this, and when I've looked at other towns, what happens is they pass an ordinance after they've had a disaster.
Yep.
Some really significant building in town was torn down, not a house necessarily, but a significant building was torn down, and then everybody says, oh my gosh, how did we let that happen? And then they get busy, and then there's
Exactly right.
the will to pass the ordinance.
And this wouldn't have affected the Mary Taylor building.
No.
No.
And why not? Because it wasn't in proclaimed historic.
It's not a national landmark
Yeah.
or a historic landmark,
So-
and not in a district.
So we're hoping not to get to the point that other towns have reached, where something significant is gone.
Right.
And
And that's the thing, I mean, demolition can happen pretty quickly in most circumstances. I mean, you apply
Yeah.
for a permit, get the permit, and boom.
true.
So I will say, and I'm just thinking about Jacobs Avenue now. So say that one was, the state had already done its review, and the state said, yeah, that should be a historic district. We're sending it to the state or the feds. And then someone came into our office, and this is before this ordinance, right? If this passes. And then someone came into our office to demolish the house that got demolished on Jacobs Ave that the neighbors got really bent out of shape about. It really is not going to, I don't think, impact that national listing of that district, because there are districts that have non-contributing buildings and non-contributing lots.
Sure.
So what they probably would do is they would probably just draw it in as if it's in the district, but say it's non-contributing anymore.
Yeah.
I'm just,
No, I get that part of it, yeah. But the question would have been more whether it would have had any beneficial effect. This
It wouldn't
ordinance. Right, I get it now, yeah. But it would have had that application been into the feds.
right.
Then all of a sudden this would kick in.
This would apply to
And then
them.
people would have an opportunity to say, hey, look at this neighborhood, all these little bungalows, aren't they great?
Mm-hmm.
Let's keep it that way. And he's like, well, I want to build another bigger bungalow.
And they could build that bigger
120 days later.
120 days later. And
Got it.
it is exactly right what Judy's saying about historic preservation ordinances. That's how they generally happen, is something happens in that town where a building that is so loved and people care about and it's iconic in that town, and then all of a sudden one day it goes away. I was just reading in the Bangor Daily this weekend about a building in Old Town, a general from, I don't know, Civil War. I don't know who, I forget his name now, but lived there. Same thing. They don't have anything in Old Town. It was a big, beautiful old house, and it got demolished, and now people are all bent out of shape that they don't have anything. How could you do this? How could you let it happen?
One would think that Old Town would have a historic preservation board.
Young thinking, yeah. Does Castine have a,
Castine is a certified local government. York is a certified
but does
local
it have
government.
an ordinance?
Yes.
Seems to
CLG.
be working
Gardner, Hollowell. I've looked at all of these, and all these CLG ordinances, the certified local governments, are generally the same. You have other historic preservation ordinances in town that aren't this certified local
Yeah.
government
Yeah.
ordinance, and that's something totally possible that if the town ever goes down the road of design review, we can do something that's not a CLG ordinance, but is something close to it. That's possible. But, and I would say like Portland's a CLG, so it's regardless of town size. Portland is, Bangor is, Lewiston is, Castine is, York is, Hamden is. There's 20, maybe 20. I don't even know
We
about
can't
20.
get to that point yet, you don't think?
No, we can't. Not yet. I mean, not by June.
Right, yeah.
I think it's worthwhile to go down that road. You know, it is about protecting character of a community, and I know some property owners may feel like it's infringing on their rights. I mean, I get that, but it doesn't have to be a complete burdensome ordinance and process. But again, it's what makes the community. It's about historic character of the community. And
Well, and as long as we're a tourist town, the character of the community counts a lot.
that's true.
And that's what brings in the tourists. And, I mean, that's what also causes people to decide to move
Live
here
here.
rather than some
Right.
other little town on the coast.
There are books on the economics of historic preservation that are full of a wealth of information. Donovan Ripkema, he's been to Maine many times talking about historic preservation and the economics of it, the plus of historic preservation.
Yeah.
What do you think, Rosie? You haven't said much.
I'm in favour of getting something passed and moving, and, you know, the more we can do it with a consensus and get people on board gradually, I think the more likely it's going to actually have teeth in the long run, because it will stick and get accepted. And, you know, I love this town, so, and I love old buildings, so I'm all for, you know, but I also build and develop, and I want things to be manageable and workable. So, yeah, very supportive.
All right. So based on this, I guess what I can do, if you guys decide to move ordinance to hearing for May 5th.
As long as Mark's not here.
Again, this is the public hearing, and then people vote at the public hearing, and then it goes to select board after that if you guys want to move it forward. So if that's the case, then the ordinance will be ready, I believe, on Monday, finalized Monday, so that we can do a hearing on the 5th. If that's the case, if that's what you'd like to do.
So you want to add that onto the MET building hearing?
It's going to be what it is. Either it's on that day or on the 12th. I'm running out of time, so.
Next door.
How long?
Maybe we'll have it
How long do
here
you think
while
it's
during the
gonna
meeting.
take? I mean, how much talking do you think there's going to be realistically?
Public hearing on this one?
Yeah.
I don't think there'll be much more than we've had now. I mean, I've had all of these ordinances out on the website. They're advertised, and, you know.
We're an hour earlier, and we'll take a break in the middle, so you can go order long grain. How about that?
Sounds good.
All right, we've got a deal.
I mean,
We'll do it for a hearing.
I like that even better.
So if you guys make a motion and someone second it and vote, we'll move it to a hearing on the 5th. And at least we'll open it at that day so that we could continue it to the 12th, say, if that's needed.
are we also meeting on the 12th?
I'm just throwing out
Or
there
that's out
because
there, the final
I'm
date.
we're running out of
Got it.
timing to get this to the select board in time for warrant.
I won't talk. Okay,
Are you not?
I'm
gonna-
ready to make a motion.
Okay, thank you.
I move that we accept these, accept this ordinance, but with.
Generally? Why don't you say generally?
With the suggestions of some minor corrections to Jeremy to tweak, and move it for a public hearing on March the 5th
At 4 o'clock.
4 PM.
Is that it?
That's it.
I'll second you. Second it.
Does that cover everything, Jeremy?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Seconded. All those in favour? Aye. 3-0, unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, and I think we're good. We should just schedule, we've got the MET site visit at 3 o'clock on the 5th.
Correct. It's on my calendar.
Yes, and March meetings are on the 4th.
But I don't mind
At
text
4
reminders.
PM.
All right. Thank you. Do you want to, any other comments, thoughts, anything? No. Okay. You will have a application for you probably towards the end of March for, is it the mile, I don't know, the dental place, I forget the name of it, up on Elm Street. Smiles, something.
Miles of Smiles.
Yes. They're doing an expansion that went to the Zoning Board of Appeals last night.
Was it the zoning board of appeals?
Last night, because it was a special exception. So it,
Zoning board sent it back to us? I always thought it was.
yes, no, zoning board special exception, and then you guys. Because the use isn't allowed until the zoning board makes their call. Okay?
March meetings are on the 4th
There's some,
because it's
there's
a
some
budget
hearing
meeting.
after budget meeting. Yeah.
Budget meetings.
I'm not sure why we don't get to keep our time in the budget meetings.
Hello. Let me know when it's over.
It's over. We're done, thank you.